I think the kind of hustle culture is starting to diminish. I do believe there's an opportunity through marginal gains and iteration that they can start to unwind and make improvements. We saw this at my time at Barclays, where we scaled from 0 to 7.5 million mobile active users, but at the same time we're able to reduce calls to our digital help desk by 80% in the same time frame. And this was really granular, knotty problems. What's the mission of the organisation? What is it that organisation's defined itself by? What problem is it looking to solve? And what's the kind of deeper purpose that kind of brings the whole organisation together? Communication is ultimately where it all starts. So how you onboard individuals to an organisation, how is that founding mission and purpose shared?
Thank you for coming on to the podcast today. I think it would be really good just to start with a background of yourself, your career so far, and just a bit of context on what it is that you're currently getting up to at the moment as well.
Yeah, thank you for the invite, Daisy and the team. Really pleased to be here. Amazing office that you've got here at Wave. I started my career in 2008, so coming up to nearly 17 years in financial services and fintech. Started my career at Barclays Bank, spent 10 years there between 2008 to 2018, doing everything from customer operations in the branches, spent 6 years in their digital team when it was just a small team of 40. When I left that team, there's over 500 people, and with kind of pre-iPhone days, but left with 7.5 million customers actively using digital on a monthly basis. And then latterly I spent my final 2 years running lending portfolios for the corporate and business bank. So that was helping businesses of all sizes get access to lending so they can grow, employ more people, and ultimately scale. I then transitioned because I was really intrigued by engineering and the world of next generation technology. So I moved to a company called 10x, who are a cloud-native core banking provider. So for anyone that doesn't know, that's the underlying system where all of the money is held around the world. Historically, this is a very legacy kind of technology. It runs in data centers, very little in realms of public cloud. So I joined there in employee number 41. Spent 5.5 years looking after sales, client success, products and engineering, and latterly as a kind of VP and general manager running their retail and SME banking business. So where am I now? I'm at a company called the Bank of London. So we're a newly regulated payments and FI bank. We're built very differently. So traditionally banks take deposits and lend them out. So every time you place £1 with an incumbent bank, 87p of that is lent out to different types of businesses. But we're very different. We save all of our clients' funds with the Bank of England. We don't do any hedging, no lending. So you really do know that your money's safe with the Bank of London. We're primarily focused on helping other financial institutions gain access to the faster payment scheme, BACS in the UK, and the longer term ambition is to have presence in Europe and in the US. So yeah, I'm currently the Group Chief Product Officer at the Bank of London.
Nice. It's really interesting. I'd imagine across all the experiences you have from Barclays to 10x, the different types of transformations that you've been a part of. And I think within the digital transformation space, it's something that's coming out more pressingly, but it seems to constantly be evolving and changing. It'd be really interesting to understand what your take on that is and how you've seen digital transformation evolve, and for you what it looks like now.
Yeah, I think for too long digital was seen as a department in a business. So as I referenced, when I was at Barclays, it was the digital team, of which we were 50 employees out of 140,000 people. It was very much seen as, the digital team will do that. But over time, the words kind of become outdated in my mind, because it kind of implies that digital is part of the business rather than the whole business. So whether that's the cloud, software as a service, APIs, the kind of emergence of mobile banking, all of these different themes that we've seen for the last 15, 20 years have ultimately reduced the barriers to entry. If you wanted to enter a new market, historically, particularly in banking, you had to build a data center, you had to lay the concrete, lay the wiring. I've got experience from prior colleagues who spent 7 years, what can now be done in a a few hours in Terraform or on Amazon. So it really has lowered the barriers to entry for businesses of all sizes. And now I kind of talk about how can the business be digital native. So how can it be born digitally, and all it thinks about is how it can kind of transform its business. So for me, I think the word digital transformation was very much like a program mindset. It was done by a separate team. But now all leaders, everyone that works in these types of organizations needs to think about what they can do to transform the client, the colleague, ultimately the business by using all of these technologies available to them.
And is that your current focus right now, like making sure that the business is digitally native?
The business was born digital, so it was born in the cloud. We run natively in Azure and in Amazon, actually. So we were very much born in that way. So there's not as much transformation to be done in the sense of we're going from here to here. Clearly, we are newly regulated, so we exited what's known as authorization with restrictions, which is the FCA kind of milestone that allows you to trade publicly after proving that you're capable of doing that from a regulatory standpoint last April. So we're very much in this kind of growth phase. So we compete with the incumbent banks, so we look to compete against the Barclays, HSBC, NatWests of the world. But similarly, we very specifically targeted towards other financial institutions. So most people in the public will see, I actually saw an article from the Telegraph this week that were comparing Monzo and Revolut and saying which is the best bank. There's only one bank out of them two things. Actually, Revolut is what's known as an e-money institution. So they actually use an underlying bank to process their payments and to hold their own funds, which they're doing a great job. It's a great business, but it isn't a bank. And the benefits of working with a bank as an end consumer is that your money is protected under the regulatory FSCS protection, so up to £85,000 per end customer. So should that bank have any difficulties, that's what you're protected to. And similarly, they have a much higher degree of regulatory scrutiny. So whether that's controls, how they operate. So yeah, we were born digitally, but very much it's on a journey to help what is an underserved market. Specifically, what we're hoping to looking to solve in the 5-year horizon is the GBP, US dollar and euro global money movement. So if you look at them flows today, there's around £1.4 trillion moves daily, and that goes through 4 or 5 global incumbent banks, and they'll be names that everyone's familiar with, whether it's JP Morgan, Barclays. So actually trying to move money across the world is very, very difficult to do unless you work directly with one of them organisations. So they have a huge monopoly that we're looking to disrupt.
So like as opposed to transformation, it's more of a journey.
Exactly, yeah. I think the transformation, I think the way I think about this is there are certain businesses that have to do iterative kind of ways of working improvements. So if you're a huge business that've got 20 million plus customers, the way you have to iteratively improve is quite different to a startup and scale up. So I have experience in both, and I think both you always look and kind of look in awe of each other. You look at the startup that's moving really quickly and is able to be very nimble, or you look at the scale up that's got tens of millions of customers doing tens of billions of pounds of revenue. So I think there's lots to learn from each other, but very much it's pros and cons of the different types of businesses. But yeah, we're a next generation bank wanting to disrupt what is very much a monopoly by the larger players right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people in leadership or just in general kind of stick to like enterprise, startup, scale up. They don't really tend to like vary between like the three. So it must be interesting like what you take from, as you say, like one another and what you can apply from your experience in Barclays into what you're doing now. So
yeah, it was a very conscious choice. So I had a great time, and I've got a lot of respect and love for Barclays. It was a great 10-year time of my career. The thing I was always intrigued by was if as a business person, which is my background, how I could empathise and get closer to technologists. So I was always 2-3 steps removed from engineers. So I probably only spoke to engineers twice a year. because you had layers put in between the business and ultimately the engineers to help them understand what the business was trying to solve. And I think it was this mindset that, and this was true at the time, that majority of business people weren't able to give clear or understandable direction because it could be contradictory, it couldn't be the right way to build their solutions. So actually you had layers that were ultimately translating from, here's the business goal, we want to launch lending via the mobile banking application. That was the kind of bigger picture. And then you had these different, until it got to an engineer, which is, we need an API to sit on top of this system that allows an application for a retail customer that has this amount of information. So I think historically that translation layer was required. But I think the businesses that have done better, particularly in the enterprise space, are the ones that have collapsed the layers of abstraction, and the ones where business people are able to articulate themselves, empathize with, and lead scale engineering organizations. So we've seen this very much in the West Coast. All of the majority of the big, whether that's Google, AWS, they've all been led by engineers or people that have worked very closely with engineers. So I think the future of banking leadership will look very similar. I always joke that people go and do an MBA, but I think an MTA, which is a Master of Technology Administration, is the next place that a majority of business leaders need to go.
Yeah, but that's a hard transformation in itself, isn't it? Like removing those layers, and it's hard to see in organisations where it's been like that for so long how you can do that. Would you say you haven't got any layers currently where you're working?
No, very much so. So I'm Chief Product Officer, but my teams work very, very closely and in partnership with tech leads. So we have a product owner, lead developer structure, and very much I'm on a personal level keen to understand how we're building this, what's the pros and cons. When we lay out the kind of product roadmap, I want to hear, I see where we're wanting to head. If you change 10% of the scope of that, we can deliver it 5 times quicker, because there's a lot of nuance in how software needs to be built, and sometimes what could be perceived as, here's the 5 things we're hoping to achieve, number 4 might be driving 90% of the effort but only 5% of the value. So I think the more product and business people can empathize and understand that and work through them nuances, the better. Because ultimately, I'm a big believer, particularly in the growth phase, speed to market, speed to iterate, speed to improve is going to be a marked difference. And we see that today. Like if you go and look at the Bank of London's release notes, we probably create as much value as an incumbent organisation creates in a year in a month. The last release we've just done, we delivered open banking, we delivered direct debit payments, we delivered the ability to edit a bunch of different payment types, we launched our AI code assistant, and this was from 4 engineering teams in a single month. If you laid that roadmap out in an enterprise organisation, you'd mobilise a team, you'd have 5 project managers, you'd probably go and ask Wave for some help with a lot of other people. We did that on an engineering team that's circa 30 people in total. So the pace that we're able to move at is second to none, in my opinion, and that's absolutely necessary because clearly there's a huge different set of disadvantages that we may have.
So I know we kind of touched on it previously. There's obviously a lot of different approaches, different structures when it comes down to transformations. It'd be really interesting to hear from your perspective, having worked in a variety of different kind of environments and structures, what you find to be most effective.
Yeah, so I think firstly, a lot of my motivation, and when I look to consider moving to different firms, the things that I really look for is like, what's the mission of the organisation? What is it that organisation's defined itself by? What problem is it looking to solve? And like, what's the kind of deeper purpose that kind of brings the whole organisation together? I think a lot of organisations, they've got this real clarity of, here's where we're heading, here's what the future looks like, and here's how the world will be different when we get to that end state. I think it's easier in smaller organisations that have a really simple focus to have that, because that ultimately helps you to understand kind of where I'm heading, where I need to go. And as you come and make different types of decisions, it's kind of saying, well, if this itches me closer to this end state, that's the right type of call. I think it becomes more difficult when you have businesses that are multifaceted, global. I think how you kind of corral 100,000 plus people is quite a different type of problem, but I think it can be done, and we've seen evidence of that. Similarly, as you come to kind of structure this type of activity, I think the mission and the purpose is kind of step one, but then ultimately knowing the milestones that you're looking to achieve. So in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, this is kind of, again, the breaking down the problem, which could be, solving world famine, but then it could be, well, let's solve the hunger issue in Africa, and then we're going to have to start putting processes and iteration in place to solve that given problem. So I think ultimately having this really big 10, 20 year, how does this transform the world? Bring it down to something that's more local, 5 years, and then in the next 12 months, in the next 18 months, this is where we're directionally going. For me, I'm a big believer in the sum of marginal gains and iterative delivery. So I think there are fewer silver bullets in larger organisations because their problems tend to stem from many years of small decisions incrementally adding up to be problems or issues that they're now looking to solve. And I do believe there's an opportunity through marginal gains and iteration that they can start to unwind and make improvements. We saw this at my time at Barclays, where we scaled from 0 to 7.5 million mobile active users, but at the same time we're able to reduce calls to our digital help desk by 80% in the same time frame. And this was really granular, knotty problems. For example, when anyone got married or divorced and they changed their name, we used to get 2,000 calls a week because the system wasn't able to cope with it. And one simple change where we allowed either a maiden name or a married name to be used to log in, literally 2,000 calls overnight went away by these tiny little fixes. Similarly, when clients used to log into online banking, if it timed out, it used to time them back out to the login screen, wiped all their credentials, and people didn't know what they were. So again, a subtle change. When they timed out, we took them to the public website, so all of their login credentials were retained. Again, 1,500 calls a week that were just disappearing. So I think the ability to focus on data, listen to your customers, and ultimately have the combination of mission, vision, and iteration is what I've seen successful to date. It was a similar story at the Bank of London. As I referenced, we have this really big picture vision, which is solving kind of global money movement, particularly across. So solving global money movement and the settlement and clearing risk is the founding 20-year purpose. And anyone who's a bit of a payments nerd will know that this is a real challenge. But doing that across the US dollar, euro, and GBP corridors is kind of the 3 to 5 year ambition. So trying to solve that in the UK, which is our target market that we're focused on in the first instance, is very much so. We're direct members of Faster Payments, we're direct members of BACS, and we're soon to be direct members of the CHAPS schemes. So you can kind of see this layering approach, big picture, solve global money movement, 5-year vision, solve that across US dollar, euro, and GBP corridors, which is about 87% of FX globally anyhow. And then on a local level, how can we enable payments to be available to all financial institutions that deserve the right to have access, because there are some that do not in the UK. And this kind of helps drive the team across a variety of different work streams and across kind of Horizon 1 and 2 and 3 times of timelines as well.
Do you find it challenging with ensuring that everybody is brought in on the mission, and like how do you kind of know? Cause I'm sure, like, say with some software engineers, they just want to like build something cool, they're not necessarily thinking of like the end goal here. So like, how would you advise for you to be able to kind of come into business and ensure that every single person like is on the same page? Obviously, as you say, it is a lot more complex in the big organisations, but is there anything that you've seen to work really well to ensure that?
Yeah, I think like anything, like communication is ultimately where it all starts. So how you onboard individuals to an organisation, how is that founding mission and purpose shared? How through the recruitment process, whether that's through partners or through direct hiring, how do you share the kind of vision that you're looking for? Ultimately, it's quite difficult finding people that have the skill set that's kind of this combination of digital technology and banking experience. So you can either look for the unicorns that have all three, and it's a very small pool, particularly ones that have got legacy understanding of how banks work, but also technology understanding of the future. Alternatively, you can bring together teams that can provide that context. bringing in the best engineering talent and forming them with the best product talent that understand the problem. I think then it's in the same way I spoke about mission and purpose. It's very much understand as part of the onboarding, making clear kind of where we're heading, what we're doing, and then it's just reinforcement at every opportunity. So a few of the things we've done is we provide a 24-month roadmap which looks at like where we're heading, what's the long term, how does it all fit together. And then on a monthly basis, we do a monthly release demo to the whole company. And we also publicly enable this for our clients and prospects to read as well. So it's kind of saying, well, here's the mission on a 24-month basis, here's the direction of travel. On a monthly basis, here's how we're getting closer to it and joining from this small change to the big picture. We also do we only plan on a quarterly basis because it's very difficult in a smaller company to do really long-term planning and forecasting. I'm a big believer in long-term vision, short-term plan. So we have a quarterly planning cycle where the products and engineering team work through what's the roadmap for the coming quarter. We present that back to the whole business. We allow engagement. We want questions. We want challenge. And then ultimately, at the point that we've agreed that this is the plan, we kind of get on with execution. So I think this combination of understanding where you're heading and then reinforcing the messages at every opportunity is key. And clearly, I'm relatively new into this business. I've been here 7.5 months. And there's some people that have been here 2.5 years. So trying to understand the context of prior decisions and help me understand how this fits into the bigger picture is really important. But ultimately, I think combination of communication, regular dialogue, and sharing of that internal and external view is critical.
Do you get a lot of people involved in the quarterly planning as well, as opposed to just like senior leadership? Is it?
Yeah, it's very much done on a bottom-up basis, actually. And that's part of, you also as a senior leader get a chance to validate, do people know where we're going? For example, one of the things we want to ensure is that our API channel has the same level of capability as our web channel, because we see them two things as equally important and likely API to be more important as we proceed. But we did start with a UI. So very much, I think it's a good way to validate, do people understand the principles of the business? And if you see things going awry, for example, if someone came and said, we're going to build all of these things in the UI and we're not going to do it in the API, you'd say, help me understand what led to that decision. How does that form part of the wider vision? So I think bottom up from the teams is super helpful. I think also having a good dose of top down, where the decisions maybe the data or insight doesn't kind of support a fact, that's okay, because most businesses have to take leaps of faith to do things that maybe the data or the bottom-up plan doesn't kind of determine. But ultimately, to deliver these step changes, a combination of bottom-up and top-down is very much needed. So for me, the quarterly cycle is very much a bottom-up process, and then that's presented and reviewed and discussed with all members of the team. Actually, it's done on a whole company basis. We do that on like a Zoom call where people can ask questions and critique and challenge the priorities, which I more than welcome.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we work with a lot of businesses that have the opposite approach. Obviously, of course, more in the enterprise space, but it's a really great way to, as you say, see how aligned everybody is internally. That's a really easy way to then spot, are people working in the right direction? Is that because they're not bought into the mission or understand where we're going? So it's interesting to hear that.
Yeah, I think again I've got other examples. Like one of the pieces we wanted in my prior organisation was to have the most capable ledger in the world. So we had this real big ambition to be able to build a ledger that could deal with 100,000 transactions per second at sub 50 millisecond latency. So that ledger would have been able to cope with any bank in the world. It was kind of built for the biggest banks. Clearly that was kind of part of wasn't the mission, but it was certainly an objective that supported it. If you tried to create like a top-down roadmap to enable that, it would have been a terrible idea. Most of the leadership team had not worked in software, or certainly not at that level for many years. There was many technologists around the table, but very few that understood or had ever built a ledger that was capable of doing something like that. So then going and seeking input from the ledger engineering team was critical. They could understand, if we make these subtle changes, if we make these subtle changes, if we make this big change, that's going to get us closer to it. So I think, again, where you can see the mission, vision, and the underlying what's the roadmap to enable it, it has to be a combination of the people that know the detail, but the stretch from a bunch of different people. Similarly, I used to work with a gentleman called Ashok Vaswani, who was a big believer in what's known as the big, hairy, audacious goal. So setting these crazy, we need to go from X to 100X in 6 months. And initially I kind of started with challenging, can't we just go to 7X or 12X? Like that just feels too stretching. But actually having this really big kind of BHAG, as we used to refer to it, kind of it just removed all challenge. It was like, actually, if I was to try and achieve that, what would need to be true? And I think it just gives a completely different mindset. And I've used that quite a lot since. So we want to go from 100 transactions per second to 100,000 transactions per second. It's very difficult to do that in an incremental way. You really do have to think differently about the problem. Similarly, as you see, 1.4 trillion daily across 5 organizations, how can I disrupt that? It takes a different type of problem solving. That's not going to be done from a couple of Jira tickets and one API. There's got to be a completely different philosophy of how you approach that problem, which I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you touched on kind of making small changes as you go along, and the examples that you shared of like the phone calls and stuff. It can always be quite challenging, because I think especially in this industry where technology is so fast moving and there's always something new, like AI right now is just like the hot topic of every conversation. And like what I kind of find is with a lot of businesses, there's so many like skeletons still in the cupboard, but then there's AI, and it's like, well, what do we kind of prioritise? How do we not need to focus on this thing here because everybody else is doing it, and then neglect those things there? So would you say like the most important thing first would probably be to uncover all of that stuff and probably deal with the ugly stuff before kind of chasing the new shiny things?
Yeah, I think as a growing business particularly, it's very easy to spend all of your time doing what are known as hygiene factors. Like, we're a newish bank, we need to do all of these small things because all of the other banks have them, which is very true. But we'll be chasing our tails for many years if we do that. We'll be kind of constantly just building like hygiene things that isn't going to get clients excited. So the way I kind of think about this, and it's quite simplistic, but I have 1/3 of the time spent on strategic big bets, completely tangential. Our AI assistant formed part of that, which it's difficult to quantify the benefits, but we know learning and experiencing it is the right thing to do. The second part is iterative improvements based on prospective client or internal feedback. So that could be, if your API could do this, or if your bank enabled that, it could be a way to close the deal. And then thirdly, there's very much that kind of skeletons in the closet, regulatory focus, the kind of risk mitigation that ultimately, if you look at it today, say it's fine, we can deal with that for another 6 months. But if you continue to allow it to grow, it becomes a problem for your business. So I think having some principles of what's the right balance, and it changes over time. We've had times in prior businesses where it was 70% of what we were doing was helping us scale, helping us to become more robust, helping with resiliency, because we were going from 0 to a couple of million end users, and we needed to iron out a few issues quickly. But I think as a growing business, to attract clients, in the same way I'm sure it is for Wave, you have to do things differently, and you have to think kind of outside the box, or you're just another kind of recruitment firm. So what is it about us that makes it different? How do we differentiate? So for me, 1/3 strategic big bets, differentiation, 1/3 a kind of iterative client feedback, prospective feedback, kind of knowing that it's important and that will ultimately help us close some near-term revenue. And then the third is very much kind of technical debt, scaling, making the code simpler to understand, regulatory closure. Clearly as a bank, like regulatory compliance is P1, but there's always ways to reduce risk, improve controls. So yeah, broadly speaking, that's how we think about it internally.
You say a lot of leaders kind of lean more towards the strategic stuff, but it's kind of more fun, you say?
This is something I struggled with in prior roles, particularly in larger organisations, because there was always this tendency to look for the silver bullet. It's always like, AI would probably be a great example, and I don't know that to be today, but as you say, you're kind of constantly just zigzagging from one shiny thing to the next shiny thing, and it's not really clear of what does business success look like. So for me, I think it's important to continue to experiment. I've seen many of the larger incumbent banks around the world. They were observers to cloud, and they were just saying, "Oh, we'll see how it progresses," but continued to invest deeply in data centers, and probably had like 1% of budget spent on cloud. And now they're just all playing catch up, and they're so far behind, it's 5-6 years behind. So I think having a foot in the innovation camp and doing it in a way that your organization gets to learn is critical. Doing nothing and just having PowerPoint decks that summarize the world is not helpful in my opinion. But yeah, for most of the time, I think you have to balance it. You can't be 100% innovation because you'll never get anything actually substantive done, and it will always be kind of shiny, shiny, shiny. But really focusing on this is where we're going. These teams are going to really help us push the boat here. These teams are going to work on transforming the core business, and these teams are going to look to solve our client satisfaction or revenue objectives. But doing that trying to do that on an annual or kind of couple of year basis is helpful. Kind of constantly doing this every 6 months where you could zigzag either way is not helpful because it just takes time to get into a good rhythm.
So I know you have touched on it, but it would be really interesting just to go into a bit more detail around when it comes down to the kind of skill sets that are required within leadership and probably across the organisation. Typically when working in like transformation programs or those where there's constant change and improvement. It'd be good to know like your kind of take on that and what you think is really important skill set wise.
Yeah, so if I break skill set into kind of 3 key areas, which would be people, kind of process and culture. I think firstly on people, as I referenced, I think there's been traditionally kind of really clear lines between leading software engineers versus say operational colleagues, and I actually think the leaders of the future will have the ability to engage and to inspire both a huge variety of different types of colleagues. I think similarly their ability to empathize with people that work directly with clients, maybe work in sales, them who work directly with technology. I think historically you have leaders that have one that they over-index in one or the other. So I think first on a leadership basis, empathizing with both tech, operations, and being able to do that kind of independently and also then at the same time is key. I think on the process part, as I referenced, I think you have to, as a leader, particularly in enterprise organizations, have this real balance between being kind of super diligent and focused on the vision, but actually being able to iteratively work towards it and not get too drawn into the silver bullet or magpie syndrome, as I call it, like chasing the shinies. On a personal level, I think having this balance of, like I said, strategic work, kind of critical things that help you close small to medium term, and then giving the space for the right people to make the right calls on technical debt, software enhancements, ways of working improvements is also key. And then I think on the cultural side, the world has changed a lot in recent years. I think COVID was clearly a terrible time for many, but it did create an environment that was just dramatically different in most areas. So I think choosing what type of organization you will be and then being kind of super specific and also, I guess in some ways, just really open to the types of culture that you want to create. I think the kind of hustle culture is starting to diminish. I think there very much has to be this balance, and a good friend of mine actually speaks about this, where people have varying stages through their professional life where maybe their sole focus is work and getting things over the line, and that's great. Like I've enjoyed moments of that myself and continue to do so. I then had a young daughter who ended up in hospital for 3 weeks post birth, which was just a crazy time where I didn't want to think about work at all. Like all I wanted to do is focus on family time. So I think creating cultures that both support a real diverse mix of people in different stages of life, but also in different types of work. After leading kind of large operational teams and then running kind of global software, it's honestly like two so different jobs that you just can't apply the same types of skill. Similarly, leading people where you can't do their job is quite different. Because I think if you just become more senior in a given, say in marketing, and you work up and you started as the junior marketing manager and you end up becoming the chief marketing officer, you have experience at all the varying types of business through that route, so you can actually empathise in the way that you did the job many years ago. I'm sure it's different now, but if you are leading software engineers and you've never been a software engineer, I think you have to acknowledge that as a leader, allow them the space and the time, and give them the kind of air cover, particularly under if there's an incident or if something's not gone well, to understand what you could do better. So for me, people, process and culture, and then thinking about particularly the different types of business and area that you're leading is so key.
It's interesting because with your background is obviously quite different, where you've worked in so many different areas. I think you've worked in sales as well, whereas a lot of the time, and what you'll see especially in this industry, is like engineering, through to engineering manager, through to CTO, like it's very, you don't really see a lot of kind of variations, but what would you say is kind of that's taught you working in all those different spaces?
Yeah, I think you just have to be so flexible. I think there's a lot of things that are common, but they're probably more in like behaviour and ability to listen, ability to know when to intervene, ability to know when to allow the team space. I think they're all very common types of traits. Ability to inspire, provide the vision, get out of people's way, kind of look at ways to improve kind of day-to-day working. I think a lot of the generic practices can be applied, but then not going into new roles or new parts of the business and being just a sponge to hearing things. Spending times with the team to understand whether that's the domain or the functional area that they're working in is key. I'm very much, as you say, a generalist. It's always kind of been in and around product management. But yeah, over time, I've enjoyed going and doing completely different things, which is one of the big benefits actually of working in a startup or a scale-up, because as things progress, it's like, oh, you've done a good job here. Do you fancy going and doing that for a bit to see how it is? Because similarly, most of these companies, you're doing something for the first time in the world, or if there's a pool of people, there's maybe a handful of people around the world that have done something similar or explicitly the same. So I think that's what I've enjoyed about my kind of startup and scale-up journey, that you were definitely given opportunities that you wouldn't have done just applying on the street, and rightfully so. So yeah, I think ultimately people are the fundamental. People are ultimately doing all of these jobs. So your ability to work with, inspire, coach, lead different types of organisations has been the thing I've focused on the most.
And working in those different areas as well, do you now see like the importance of leadership across those different sort of pillars, actually communicating and sort of being on the same page? Do you spend a lot of time with leaders across all the different areas of the business, as opposed to just kind of like tunnel vision on products, for example?
Yeah, no, 100%. And as I said at the start, like I think the digital team was once a team and it was kind of doing digital stuff. Whereas now, if I look across my role, it includes products externally, i.e. the product that our clients are going to consume, but it also includes the internal roadmap of tooling and systems that allow our colleagues, whether that's in finance, in operations, in audit, and how can they kind of become more kind of transformative and adopt the most recent tools. So I work really closely with our chief operating officer, so he runs all of our onboarding to onboard clients, he runs payment screening, he runs kind of transaction monitoring, he runs client services that deals with inbound client calls, and we've got quite a lot to show in the coming quarter of how we're going to transform that kind of client engagement experience, both from a back end, so how we can make our operational colleagues' lives a lot easier, and similarly on how we can make the client experience much easier. So yeah, very much I think how we can apply product management theory and thinking and road mapping across the whole business is part of it. I don't see it as the client-only roadmap, if you like.
Yeah, it's interesting because we kind of spoke about it before filming, but we do a lot of like workshops, and we used to do engineering leaders, product leaders, design leaders, and then after a few months we kind of realised there's so much that everybody else could get from the sessions, and now we do them combined, so it's engineering, product and design. And the amount of people that come along that never even really speak to engineering leaders in their business or product leaders, it's so kind of like siloed. And it's the kind of insights you get from those conversations is it's crazy how much kind of more you can get from just actually communicating more.
Yeah, I actually, my boss at my prior company was the Chief Product and Technology Officer, which I know there's this whole debate of Chief Product Officer or CTO and the kind of skill set. He was an engineer, came through the engineering line and then did an MBA, converted to CPTO and was previously at the train line during their kind of growth phase and into IPO. So that was the first time I'd worked for a CTPO that kind of wore both hats. And he had this amazing way of like knowing, he wasn't a banker, so didn't understand banking per se, but had a deep empathy and understanding and question set for what we were building and why, and so he could get under the skin of it, but also was quite provide a lot of autonomy to us to make the progress on that side. And then he had just this ability to work at 10,000 square foot on an architecture vision, and then periodically jump down into kind of the micro detail on the engineering side as well. So yeah, I think for me, whether or not the roles will be kept distinct, but the communication has to just be so much improved, particularly in larger businesses. So when I go and maybe become a big bank CEO of the future or a senior leader of the future, I think the closer you can get them to functions together, the better. Because ultimately the closer the communication between them, the bigger the transformation, in my opinion. And that is both by technology being able to work closer with business, and also business people being able to empathise and work closer with engineering/technology as well.
Yeah. And as you're then looking at the success of transformations, programs, how would you say are the most effective ways to measure that?
Yeah, so for me, I've been a big believer for many years. It actually kind of where my Barclays career started, and it's something I've used a lot thereafter, is what I call the balanced scorecard, which is a very kind of standard piece. But understanding, if you look at your business, whether that's clients, colleagues, revenue, growth, how does what does a successful business look like? Does it look like revenue growing? Does it look like cost going down? Does it look like cost to serve improving? Does it look like a bigger shift to more users interacting with you digitally? Does it look like your deposit kind of balance sheet growing? Like, what are the 10 or 12 metrics that kind of give you critical indicators of how your business is performing? And generally that should be balanced. It shouldn't be focused on a singular dimension, because if you tend to focus on one dimension, so that's revenue, you can see issues appear elsewhere. So taking a balanced scorecard approach, and then looking at that on a regular basis. So whether that's monthly, we used to speak about the 4 C's: so customer, colleague, community. I can't remember what the last one was, maybe commercial. And seeing how the business is moving over time, because ultimately you'll go and do a set of initiatives, or you'll build a roadmap, and its primary objective is to spike or to improve one of them key dimensions. So I think measuring a business across a set of balanced dimensions is really important, and that's why I think the kind of incremental approach is actually better, because I think rather than just getting excited by, oh, here's this big shiny new piece of technology, it's like, well, what has it actually achieved for the business? Which metric is it there to drive? Has it achieved that outcome? So yeah, for me, it's the balanced scorecard is how I've approached that to date.
When you have those like incremental metrics, do you find that everything kind of moves forward together, or is it still quite challenging in terms of like there will always be things that move forward a lot easier, and then there'll be things that kind of hold?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some things. But if you're putting a lot of change through the business, it can be, particularly if you're a scale business, there can be like hiccups along the way. So I think you'll see this in a lot of the kind of theory of like when some of the huge tech firms have got hundreds of millions of users do something differently, and everyone's a little bit dissatisfied for a short period, and then it kind of comes through. So I think there is correlation, tends to be if you're doing huge amount of seismic change, then some of your client base can get upset. But I think particularly in a growth business, our clients get really excited by the level of change we're doing. And like I said, we look at our release notes and our release demo every month and think, wow, it's a huge sales point. If you want to find a next generation payments bank, you want one that's materially making movement month over month over month. If your bank hasn't done any innovation for 2 years and it's kind of just making small changes that doesn't seem to be impacting you, I'd be a little bit reticent that are they the banking partner for I, particularly in the banking as a service space, which is where we also play. It's one of them areas that's still relatively embryonic. So actually the future is to be defined by a few of us. So we have big plans that we want to make rapid progress on. So whenever I look to a partner, we're working with a few at the moment actually, and they seem to be doing some huge investments and making great progress in a few really critical areas that I'm very excited by.
Nice. And I guess on the other side of things, when it comes down to challenges, are there any that strike to be quite common, challenges within the transformation space? Any kind of advice you give on that?
Yeah, I think in smaller companies, as a reference for me, I think the ability to have that you have to have the mission. If you don't have a mission and that kind of clear vision, you're kind of rudderless. You don't really know where you're heading. So you have to have the mission initially. So if you don't have one and if everyone doesn't understand it, that's challenge number one to solve. I think the second part then is kind of this balance between kind of short-term incremental, but also trying to make progress on them big bets. So I've obviously spoke a lot about the incremental gains, but it is also important to make step changes and to make that significant investment. Just because something takes 6 to 9 months to do doesn't mean it's not important. You shouldn't just focus everything on short-term kind of small wins. On larger businesses, the challenges that I faced at the time were the budgeting cycles, as I'm sure you feel the pain of sometimes, were just like so contradictory to how the business was looking to run. You started your budget or basically pictures from June, and then by February the next year you might know if you've got some budget. You then have to go and mobilize a huge program of work because you didn't really have any kind of committed people to help you solve problems. So you ended up spending 7, 8, 9 months a year pitching for budget that you had 4 months to spend prior to the next phase of budgeting. So it's very difficult when you're a PLC to not do that because you're trying to manage markets and investors and ultimately your share price. But I think the more you can say, well, we know we're going to spend, I'll make it up, 70% of the total budget, and I'll ensure that for the next 3 years, the budget holders know that this is how much minimum cash you've got, and then make the pitchable amount just a smaller. So that can be then towards them strategic bets or the tactical work that you need to do on a year by year basis. But solving the budget cycle, thinking about the mobilization phase, and like I said, since I've left FTSE, we've always like middle of December and middle of January didn't feel any different to prior months. Whereas in bigger organisations, you had this like 3 or 4 months, it just felt like you were spinning wheels waiting to know if you'd got cash or you could actually spend money. Yeah, it just wasted a lot of effort. So budgeting cycles and how you get out of your team's way would be the thing I'd solve if I was back in a larger organisation.
And with the bigger investments, how frequent would you say that those investments should be to kind of stay ahead of the curve? And obviously there's a balance between obviously not kind of overdoing it and getting too excited, but then also trying to get ahead before others do. Would you say there's like a sweet spot between the two?
I don't think I could put like a time frame on it, like it's this amount of time, but I think having a really clear definition of success and a definition of focus is key. So at the moment we're very focused on foreign exchange accounts, so providing our clients access to US dollar and euro clearing and their ability to hold currencies in them currencies. Similarly, we're very focused on our direct chaps membership. So I think they're probably 6 to 12 months pieces of work. And I'm also a big believer in having less kind of work in progress. So I'd only run 2 of them things in parallel, 2 or 3 of them. I wouldn't have 10 of them types of work streams because I think you need to give clarity to the organisation that these are the biggest focus and this is what success looks like. we talk a lot internally about getting to done, which is actually it's available, it's marketed, it's consumable, it's tested, we've sold it, we've got brochureware, it's commercially making sense. So I think not starting the next thing before you finish the last thing would be my piece of advice. I think then in a larger enterprise, I see a lot of bigger organizations, and I tend to like it. They have like 3-year focuses. So it's like, here's the next 3 to 5 years. But I think how you can break that down into something that makes sense to a cashier in a branch or someone that works in a contact center, or how do you make it kind of real and tangible for the 100,000 people that work in your organization is always the trickiest part. Because clearly it's you can articulate a vision, but then what do I do day to day differently is the key that kind of brings the whole organisation behind it.
Yeah, and just kind of lastly, it's obviously interesting to look back on your career and the experience with Barclays, with 10x, obviously supporting them as they scaled massively across both businesses. So I'd imagine looking forward that trajectory will probably be the same, and you'll be looking to grow and to scale. So it'd be interesting to know from your experience what it takes to build successful teams and also to retain them as well.
Yeah, so I always find it a little odd when I speak about my career because I've only actually moved twice. So I literally did 10 years at Barclays, 5.5 years at 10x, and then I've been at the Bank of London for 7.5 months, although, as you said, I've had quite a varied opportunity. I think assembling great teams ultimately comes down to a few things. So attracting them, firstly, is a combination of team, culture, and compensation. And culture includes kind of the vision and where we're heading. I always hear the phrase that kind of people leave bad bosses, which I don't think is, I think it's overly simplistic. I think clearly if you're a bad boss, the likelihood is that people want to leave. But if you have a great mission, you're compensated well, and you're all kind of part of a bigger team, then how great or bad an individual is, clearly there's some extremes that shouldn't be supported. But ultimately, I think that's kind of how you bring people in and keep them. I think assembling teams for a company is a combination of kind of what is it that you're actually doing? Is it really differentiating? Is it something that people can really get behind? And then is the problem challenging? Everyone that I've had the most fun working with is when they're trying to do something really difficult and it feels like next to impossible to solve the problem. And that's what gets me excited. If you're coming into work and it kind of felt monotonous or just not that exciting, that's where I get a little bit disengaged. But over time, I've always felt in different functions and different areas, what we were looking to achieve was very, very hard, but working with really smart, committed people, that would be my kind of biggest wins. And then similarly, kind of empathy and allowing people to operate in a kind and progressive way is clearly very, very important.
And I guess when you're kind of looking at people, what would you say are the main things that you look for in those people when you think like this would be the right kind of match for them, like this is going to be a good kind of partnership?
Yeah, I think diversity of thought at a leadership level is really important, and diversity of background is key. So if I think of when I had my products and engineering leadership, and very similar to now, like having a combination of like big tech, startup, bank, consultancy experience, you kind of just merge these groups together, and just like their shared experience was so different. It's like, oh well, we did this here and we did this there, and this is what worked really well in this context. So I think being able to contribute kind of different experiences from different parts of the kind of the world or business is key. Similarly, people being at different life stages, I also think is really important because it kind of provides an empathy of what our teams were going through. At peak, I had about 250 people across the UK, Europe, India, and Australia. So being able to understand and empathise and have perspectives about what was it like to grow up and work in India, what was it like to grow up and work in Australia, what was it like for people that are having families, what was it like for people that are new into their careers. You kind of had this age, culture, business diversity again that enabled you to do things differently and also to pull together when you were needed. So for me, diversity in the broadest sense, whether that's sex, age, cultural background, race, kind of helped all of us be a better team and ultimately a better leadership team from my perspective.
Yeah. So when you're looking at the products that you're building, how they can attract everybody and not just one demographic.
Exactly. Yeah, if you look at like the Bank of London's kind of my peer group now, we've got a lady who was at Google. She's from Denmark. She's fabulous. She's like one of the best marketeers and brand builders I've ever worked with. That's not my area of skill, but every day I kind of learn from her. Similarly, our deputy chief executive was super senior in banking. She was then a CEO of a technology firm. She worked in private equity. She over-indexes in kind of brand building, business, culture. Our chief business development officer's worked in big tech sales, has worked in banking. He's from Yorkshire, he's not from Denmark, which is similar to me. We've got a CTO who's got experience in consulting and in technology. So I think if you think of like putting these teams together, similarly our chief HR officer is from Brazil. It kind of, I don't know, the challenges you have when you're working through different problems, it's kind of like, the perspectives are so different. But then when it does come out the other end, I feel like it's much more considered and lands better with the team or with clients as well. So yeah, I think there's lots of examples where you put these arguably very diverse groups of individuals together and how that ultimately concludes and helps your business.
I think that really helps with that kind of retention piece as well, because you've clearly got a really inclusive workforce, and I think, you know, obviously we work with businesses all the time that as they're scaling they want to focus on diversity, but they don't necessarily have kind of anything internally to show that they're an inclusive workforce. And I think just having that visibility there of the clear diversity that's present really helps people, because they come in, they feel comfortable, they feel heard, and I think that's kind of so important and it's often overlooked.
Yeah.
Kind of those inclusion strategies.
Yeah, so we're actually one of the only banks. I think we're the only bank in the UK that's led by an openly gay man. So Anthony Watson is our founder and CEO. He previously founded a crypto exchange known as Uphold as well. He's just received a CBE for his services towards that community, and that kind of focus on diversity from a kind of personal perspective is exactly what kind of resonates through our business. So one of the reasons we were founded was because he, in his prior company, was struggling to get bank accounts with incumbent banks because they just had like a policy no rather than a client yes. And there is lots of different businesses, whether that's foreign exchange firms or e-money institutions or other types of financial institutions, where the bigger banks are uncomfortable from a policy perspective that the whole sector feels the pain, whereas there may be 4 or 5 bad actors in every 100, but that means there's 95 great businesses. So that kind of focus on ensuring that no one's left behind and that everyone feels included is critical. We're actually the primary sponsor of the Rainbow Honours as well. So there's a lot of things of that inclusivity comes from the very start, and it's not just in kind of how we operate as a leadership group, but it's how we operate with our clients and how we want to do business as well. So it certainly was a big draw for me when I joined the Bank of London.
Yeah, it starts from the inside, doesn't it? And I think then you'll naturally find as you scale, it becomes a lot easier to attract diverse talent because you are diverse.
You do what you say, right? If you can talk a good game, but if you look at the diversity of that group in a bunch of different factors, it's very, very much meets that criteria. So yeah, walk the walk, not talk the talk.
Yeah, it's like a lot of things that you don't necessarily see or that are obvious, but there'll be certain things that you do that just will then attract diverse people because it's kind of full of diverse people internally.
Yeah, exactly. No, you ultimately end up kind of recruiting people that you know or people within your kind of community. So I think we've seen that very much across the Bank of London.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. It's been really interesting to hear your kind of insights and I think some really interesting perspectives there that are often very different to what I hear a lot of the time. So it's really interesting to learn more around your kind of background and approach. And I think it's definitely the way forward for sure. I think having that incremental approach and looking at things differently is definitely the way forward. And you can see a pattern with a lot of businesses that are trying to push more towards that way. So no doubt this podcast will definitely help. Kind of a lot of people across my network in, I guess, kind of changing mindset, which would be really helpful. So really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invite, Daisy. Hope you and look forward to hearing the pod.
Yeah, me too.